When you think about what to do, is it just go buy Bitcoin? Is it buy real estate? Is it buy gold, other types of commodities? I think you and I are both sympathetic to the view of the world that like inflation is much higher. There's unlikely to be anything kind of stopping this from continuing, just given the macro structure and kind of we talked earlier about like the people who are in charge have no choice. They know that they have to solve short-term problems at the expense of long-term damage because that is what the incentive system drives. So it's not them individually their fault. It's just kind of the system that they're in. But what does the individual do, in your opinion?
So I guess the moral of the Bitcoin standard, the lesson of the Bitcoin standard was that Bitcoin's number goes up and therefore buy Bitcoin. I think the lesson of the fiat standard is fiat's number go down. Fiat is number go down technology, and the best way to protect yourself from that is to short fiat and to borrow fiat. And I think it's given me a lot of appreciation, and I say this as somebody who used to think that debt is just a bad thing, and I don't want to get into debt, and I want to just have savings. And this is why Bitcoin was such a great find for me, because it was a form of saving that worked. Because before that, you could use gold, and gold was not very good. It's been basically flat over the last 10 years. So when I found Bitcoin, it was very good because it's a form of saving that you can use. But now I truly understand that under a fiat system, if you're not getting in debt, you're essentially subsidizing everybody else for getting into debt. And so if you're the sucker who buys their house in cash, you're overpaying for the house and you're subsidizing everybody else who's buying their house on a mortgage. Now, of course, that doesn't mean everybody should go out and max all their credit cards and get all the debt that they can. The flip side of this is that it's not like holding Bitcoin. Holding negative fiat balances is a highly stressful thing. It means you have payments to make, and you need to be able to make sure that your cash flows can cover all of your payments, because if they don't, you could lose your collateral, you could get kicked out of your house or whatever it is. So it's a risky business, but basically I think this is the lesson of the fiat standard, that it puts everybody on a treadmill where you need to be constantly highly stressed and making payments and close to insolvency and highly vulnerable to any kind of shock that can affect your business, because you can't have savings and you need to have debt, and so everybody's more fragile. And it's in a sense, it's like walking in a field of landmines. You never know when something might happen and your business misses a couple of payments, and then your business is gone. So you have to be very careful with it. But I think I see the case for getting into debt in fiat. And I think I used to live in Lebanon, and I saw the implosion of the Lebanese economy. And it's been absolutely terrible for people who had savings in the banks, and it's terrible for people who lost their jobs. But there's one group of people that made out fine out of it, which is people who had Lebanese lira denominated debt. So I have friends who are essentially paying off the remaining of the next 20 years of their mortgage. They're going to be paying off something like 10% or 5% of their original payment, because their payments were denominated in the lira. So this is really the way to protect yourself against fiat. And if you listen to what Michael Saylor says, he says you should not sell your Bitcoin ever. You do what rich people do. And apparently this has been something that rich people have known for quite a while, and I've only just discovered it now, which tells you a lot, I guess. But this is how rich people do it, and this is what also Robert Kiyosaki talks about. You want to get into as much debt as possible at as low a rate as possible, as long as you're sure that you can cover payments. And then you don't have to sell anything. You keep accumulating hard assets. That's the way to do it. Accumulate hard assets and get into debt in fiat. That's the cheat code, basically. You want all your assets to be hard or Bitcoin, ideally, and you want your debt to be fiat.
Yeah, what you're basically describing is the whole idea of, especially in America, parents always telling people like, go get in real estate. Everyone makes money in real estate. And really the entire secret to real estate is you're borrowing money to buy an asset. And then if you're renting it out, you're using somebody else's money to make the payments. And therefore maybe you have a down payment or, kind of one-time payment or some small percentage, but you're essentially using financial engineering and this mechanism to end up owning the hard asset. But it's either borrowed money or somebody else's money, and then you end up with the asset at the end. Like, that has been a time-tested strategy for literally decades, if not centuries. Now it's just as people start to understand it from a currency perspective in the fiat world, and also see something like Bitcoin, Michael Saylor is executing, what I think most people would have referred to as like the speculative attack, converting that fiat into a hard asset. But really, it's no different than if he was borrowing money to buy real estate and he was a real estate business, right? I mean, it's almost identical to a very similar thing.
Yeah, and the difference, of course, and that's kind of the conclusion of the book is that Bitcoin is real estate on steroids. Real estate does 5, 10, 15% a year or something like that. Bitcoin's been averaging 200% a year over the last 10 years. And this year, Bitcoin only needs to end the year at 51,000 in order to continue the 200% annual growth rate on average over the last 11 years. So if this trend continues, I think that's going to be the most interesting question in the future, which is how do we deal with what happens when fiat is inflating because everybody's borrowing fiat because they're buying Bitcoin. And so people are accumulating Bitcoin by borrowing fiat. I think one kind of perhaps sad conclusion from it is that the people who have fiat privilege are going to transfer their fiat privilege into Bitcoin privilege by borrowing large amounts of fiat at low interest rates and using it to buy a lot of Bitcoin. I think another potential possibility is that we might get some kind of government restriction on the ability of people to borrow and buy Bitcoin. So they may not clamp down on Bitcoin or make Bitcoin criminalized, but they might make it so that if you have Bitcoin, you don't get to borrow, you don't get access to capital markets. I think we could perhaps see something like this at some point, but I think because otherwise it's just you can't really see how else this would go. People are just going to see more and more Michael Saylors spring up, and they're going to all want to do it, and everybody's going to max out their mortgage and their credit card and everything that they can do so that they are in as big a fiat debt as possible, so that they can stack as much sats as possible. That just means much more dollar inflation and much more Bitcoin number go up. So it'll be very interesting to watch how this unfolds over the next few decades.